Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat about how we know that the Beatles truly have become classical music. I was actually watching a game show the other night. It's called Split Second. It's on the Game Show Network. There's actually a whole network that has nothing but game shows, some new ones and some old ones, and they're all trivia contests, and I enjoy trivia contests and things like that. And in this particular one, you have three people who have a theoretical level of intelligence and knowledge, and they have to answer questions, and they have to ring in first and then pick the answer that they want. There are three choices for each category of questions. And this particular category was Beatles songs. And what they did was they gave you prose reinterpretations of the titles, and you had to name the original song. So there were three songs. The songs were All You Need Is Love. These are the answers. All You Need Is Love, Help, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. And so for All You Need Is Love, the clue was like, some affection would be nice, and help is I require assistance, and the clue for I Want to Hold Your Hand is let's press our palms together or something like that. I mean, they were stupid, but it was very obvious what the what the songs were if you know anything about the Beatles. And these three people who ranged in age from I think in their 20s to their 40s got none of them. None of them. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. I mean, nobody cared less about pop and rock music than I did when I was growing up. And it took me about 3 seconds to get all of them because you just know it. I mean, it was in the air. You acquired this knowledge through osmosis. I mean, and they're also, of course, wonderful songs. I mean, the Beatles wrote about 214 songs, and it's a body of work that ranks with the greatest body of songs in the entire literature, classical or not. I've always believed, because they are marvelous. But the idea that these three people, theoretically knowledgeable, couldn't figure any of that out just blew my mind entirely. And what does it tell us? Well, about the world of classical music and how things become classics. There, as I have pointed out before, there are three different ways something can be considered classical. One is if it was written in the classical period, which Leonard Bernstein actually identified in the widest sense to encompass from the Baroque from about 1700 to about Berlioz to about 1830 or 40, or even a little bit later. And, that's obviously, that was a period where a lot of the great classics were created. So it's known as the classical period. And then, of course, there is music which is written self-consciously by composers for classical ensembles. That is, symphonies for symphony orchestras and string quartets and piano sonatas and things like that. Art music in large forms that constitutes, there we go, part of the larger canon of classical forms and media. That is classical music in the loose sense. In other words, it's classical because of the way it's written, but it hasn't become a classic yet, because that's a process. And then the third way is that process, that winnowing process in which people decide, is generally vague and inchoate consensus of listeners and tastemakers and influencers, and nowadays it's influencers, whatever they are, but the general mass of musical activity decides what will survive and what is important. And there's academics involved. It's a whole mishmash of factors and influences, and that determines ultimately what the classical canon will be. And that's where this particular episode that I saw came in, because what it sort of demonstrated to me is that the Beatles of all people, I just can't get over this. They are no longer popular music. I mean, they aren't. They just aren't. they're not in the public consciousness anymore the way they used to be. Sure, lots of people still know, the main songs and what they are. But the fact of the matter is that if these people, these three theoretically intelligent people on this fabulous game show where you can win $10,000 if you answer all the right questions, had no clue what three of the most popular and iconic Beatles song titles were. And so that means that the oeuvre of the Beatles, the entire oeuvre, has sort of passed out of the superficial general popular music consciousness, and now it's just part of the vast sea of songs, songwriters, songs by Schubert, songs by Poulenc, songs by Mahler, songs by anybody, and songs by the Beatles. They're all just songs, and they're part of that large body which is constantly being sifted and sorted through the process of listening to determine what the great ones really are. And part and parcel of that, of becoming a classic, is a really tricky concept, which was really driven home to me by this, quite frankly, because the concept is connoisseurship. Because if they're no longer part of the popular consciousness, then the only way people are going to pay attention to them is if they are actively seeking them out, because they know about them, because people have talked about them, because people who have a certain level of knowledge and expertise are promoting them and consistently believe that they are among the most worthy exemplars of their form, that is, the rock/pop song. So the tricky part about connoisseurship, I think, is that, anybody who watches this channel knows, I just detest snobbery. It's just horrible. It's the curse of the classical music universe. It really is. The fact that because you're a connoisseur, because you know something that someone else doesn't, that you're better than they are, that you have elevated taste, that you have, and that makes you a superior being. It's very difficult to be a connoisseur without becoming an obnoxious snob. It really is. It really is, because you've put a lot of time and effort and work into developing connoisseurship. But it's connoisseurship in the most benign sense, really. That is the simple desire to acquire the knowledge of that which you love. That's, I think, the most benign definition of it, that really is going to determine what the classics of the future are going to be, and what survives and what doesn't survive. And I don't think anybody's going to argue that the Beatles are going to survive. The Beatles songs are going to survive. But they have now passed into the realm of connoisseurship, which means that their eligibility for classical status is front and center. I'm curious to know what you think about this particular phenomenon, and if you've noticed something similar too. It happens, of course, as we all get older, right? The things that we knew and took as obvious when we were younger because they were just they were in the atmosphere, they were part of growing up, are now gone. They're just not part of the consciousness of the newer generations, and sometimes we find that shocking. But there's also that wider cultural process involved, the winnowing process of making things classical. And I just felt very strongly watching this game show that I was a witness to history. So let me know what you think about it. It's really an interesting topic, I think, an interesting phenomenon. And we're all part of it. We're all in the continuum of creating the classics. So keep on listening, friends. We have work to do. Take care, and thanks for joining me.